medical science, and there will be 4 lectures by 4 distinguished medical doctors. So the duration of the session, the entire session will be almost 2.5 hours in total. The lectures will be by Dr. Peter Schleicher on coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 pandemic management in Germany, by Dr. Debabrata Roy on impact of COVID-19 on cardiovascular health in India, by Dr. Claudia Hülso on Corona 2020 stories from a Berlin testing site, and by Professor Dr. Chatterjee on neck and arm pain in the new normal area. I guess we all have this neck and arm pain nowadays. Professor Pulakshan Gupta, a former Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and a DAD Fellow, as well as a recipient of a Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, will be the moderator of this lecture session. I just like to mention the Consul General will be able to join a little later, around 8:30, because we have had a program today by the German Foreign Office, and where the German Foreign Minister, as well as the Secretaries of State of the Federal Foreign Office, organized a worldwide Advent celebration with its over 200 diplomatic missions situated all over the world. And in this celebration, 5 missions across the globe were selected to perform. We are very pleased to inform that German Consulate in Kolkata was one of these 5 chosen missions. As the Foreign Office was aware of the science lecture session of 4 hours, we were given the first slot in the program to perform, which started shortly after 6 p.m. in the Indian time. And just after our bit was over, I have switched to the science lectures. So before now, I'd like to hand over to the moderator, Professor Pulakshan Gupta. Pulakshan Gupta, please.
Thank you, Shushmita. Good evening, all the audience. Dear audience, we all know that we're in a war. The war against COVID pandemic. Till now, 75 million people over the globe have been affected by this. In terms of number, this is more than the total number of casualties we have had during Second World War. Our enemy is tiny but lethal. It is invisible. Sometimes it deceives the radar system we call RT-PCR. So under these circumstances, our warriors who are leading from the fronts are the doctors and the medical staffs. I am delighted to have 4 eminent doctors, as Shushmita said, in our panel, who will share their views, advise us how to deal with this problem. The COVID issue is not only the treating the COVID patients, it is different facets. Testing is one part. Next part is we are not accustomed to the lifestyle we are forced to adopt, and that's why several other diseases are also attacking us, and our speaker will also throw light on that. So I hope all the audience will really enjoy and enlightened by the ideas, the information, and the suggestion given by our expert doctors. So with these few words, I will invite my first speaker, Dr. Peter Schleicher. But before that, I just want to share a few things, just to put things in order. The first point, dear audience, please note this very carefully. Today we have Debabrata. Hi. The first point is that there is a slight change in pattern. Since the doctors are very busy, they may not stay with us for the whole program. So we'll take the questions after each talk. So you please write your question in the chat box. Unfortunately, because of the time constraint, I cannot actually help you directly contact with the speaker. And you know that I have only 5 to 7 minutes time after each talk. So I will try to pick up 2, 3 questions. And of course, you will have more. In that case, we'll give you the emails of the speakers. The speakers have kindly agreed to address your questions. But here I have a request to you. Please shoot your question only on the basis of the talk, not on the medical advice for different things, because that is beyond our purview, because this is a normal, reaction of human being, at least human being like me. If I have to write to a doctor, I always tell that, well, I have this headache, I have this thing, that thing, please don't do that. If you do this, then you have to take the permission of our speakers. The second point is, it happened 1 or 2 times that some of our audience, just by mistake, upload their PPTs, and our speakers cannot see it, but we can see, and that puts us in a big trouble. So I request you not to do this. And my third point is, please put your microphone in mute mode so that unwarranted sound doesn't come through. Well, I have to keep my microphone on, and the speakers, of course, they will be speaking. And my request to the speakers, that in case some accident happens, that is some PPTs are uploaded, I will let you know, and then you stop and you have to come out and get in again. If that happens, my prior apology to you. Okay, with these few things, let me introduce our first doctor, Dr. Peter Schleicher. I have to upload his brief CV. This always happens. I really do not know why.
Pulakta, shall I upload?
Yeah, no. I have this with me, and now I can share. Has it come?
Yes.
Oh, in the process of coming. Okay. Oh, it's gone. This always happens. I really do not know. Why it happens all the time with me. Just give me a few seconds. Has it come?
Full screen, Pulakta.
So, now,
Yes.
alles in Ordnung?
Yes.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's all good.
So our first speaker is Dr. Peter Schleicher. Dr. Schleicher did his degree from Nuremberg in Germany, and he has a wide range of expertise. I was just reading it. It is really amazing for the people like me that a person who has specialized in internal medicine, surgery, pediatric, then cheerotherapy, environmental medicine, sports medicine, etc., which you can read. But I just want to add a few things which Peter shared with us a few days back when we met, just to see if everything is okay. Then he said that I asked this question, what you actually do? He said, my duty is to treat from newborn to very old people or dying old people. So, I mean, whenever there is a life, Peter is there. And he also informed me that for more than 2 decades, he had a mobile clinic with which he used to go to his patients and he treated them there itself if it is manageable. Otherwise, he would refer to the hospitals. And he also informed that he did a little surgery in that mobile clinic. I was wondering if such facilities could be available in our country. Peter is a social worker. After being retired from his government jobs, he volunteered to go to different places, India, Philippines, Kenya. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, he came to Kolkata. Unfortunately, I was not there. And he stayed there maybe for a week or two. And this is Peter. With these things, I request Peter uh, to start his lecture. Meine lieber Peter, herzlichen Willkommen.
Ja, danke schön. Hello to Kolkata from Germany. Thank you for the invitation to this talk. 2 years ago, I stayed for 6 weeks in your marvelous city as a volunteer of the NGO German Doctors. And I met a lot of friendly people and discovered your great culture. Okay, do you understand me? Is technically okay?
Absolutely fine.
Okay, now I start my presentation. Jetzt geht's noch. Moment.
Okay, kein Problem.
Okay. Okay, do you see my screen?
Not yet. It will take some time. No.
Not?
No.
Okay.
If you have a problem, then I can upload your.
Okay. You don't see my screen?
No.
My full screen?
No.
That's a little problem. What can I do? Okay.
Peter, I have your PPT with me. If you want, I can upload it.
Okay, but I don't see you anymore.
No, now you cannot see it, but it's really surprising. I mean, you minimize your screen and go to the original screen where you saw us.
Okay, that's gone. Okay, shall I?
You come out and then re-enter.
A new connection. I make a new connection.
No need to have a new connection, or you can also do that. No issue.
Okay, now I see you again. Okay.
Now you try to upload your things.
Yes, I tried. Okay.
to do, when you want to go to the next slide, just tell me next. Okay?
Okay.
So, please.
Oh, next. Next. Okay, let me give first some basic informations about COVID-19 and SARS coronavirus 2. SARS coronavirus 2 means the severe acute respiratory syndrome type 2. That's the pathogen virus. The disease is called coronavirus disease 2019. Next, please. The main transmission routes are droplets and aerosols caused by, for example, coughing, speaking, and singing. The main symptoms are cough in 41%, fever in 31%, sniff 24%, disorder of smelling and taste 21%, in some studies more than 80%, pneumonia 2%. Next, risk groups are older people or people with risk factors like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, neurological diseases. Next. The incubation period, that means the period between infection and the first symptoms, is 5 to 6 days. The manifestation index, that means how many of the infected people will show symptoms, is 55 to 85%. Many infected people have only light symptoms, but some people have very severe symptoms. We have very low specific medicaments. Only remdesivir and dexamethasone show some effects at some severe cause of disease. Vaccination is coming soon. For example, BioNTech, Pfizer, or Moderna, or AstraZeneca. BioNTech is a German company. The company's headquarters is in Mainz. Next. Once more, yeah. We get a diagnosis, of course, with clinical symptoms like fever, cough, disorder of taste and smelling. And then we can secure the suspected diagnosis with a test. We can get an oropharyngeal or a nasopharyngeal swab and make an antigen test, that's a rapid test, or a PCR test, polymerase chain reaction. This test has a very high reliability. The sensitivity is nearly 100%. Next. Next. COVID-19 is a very severe disease, as you know. Complications are pulmonary complications like ARDS, that means acute respiratory distress syndrome, or neurological complications like headache, dizziness, and so on, or gastrointestinal complications like nausea, vomit, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, diarrhea, or cardiovascular complications. There are also known long-term consequences. We call it also long COVID, for like chronic fatigue syndrome or memory problems. The time of contagiousness is about 10 days. That if patients achieve immunity, respectively how long it will last is not known yet. Studies are still ongoing. A very interesting subject is super spreading events. It means one person is infecting many other people in special situations like carnival, weddings, church service, or rehearsals with a choir or parties. Next. COVID-19 in Germany. You see this picture. The red regions are highest level of infection rate. Only less are yellow, not so much infections. Germany is a federal state. Next. Next, please. Yeah. Germany is a federal state. In corona matters, our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has to discuss the procedure not only with the parliament, but also with the chiefs of the 16 federal states. We call it in Germany Länder. Sometimes these discussions are not so easy. These prime ministers of the federal states can decide for their own, and sometimes the rules in the Länder are quite different. But since yesterday, the 6th December, we have in all federal states of Germany a hard lockdown because of the increasing numbers of cases again. The main public health institute in Germany is called Robert Koch Institute. You see a picture in Berlin. Robert Koch was a famous German scientist, medical doctor, microbiologist in the 19th century. He discovered the tuberculosis bacteria. He got the Nobel Prize for it. The Robert Koch Institute gives general assessments in terms of COVID-19. And it means the risk to health of the German population is actually still high. Other important scientific advisors of our government are institutions like the Leopoldina, it's a National Academy of Sciences, or the Helmholtz Institute in Braunschweig, a center of infection research, or several university institutes for epidemiology or virology, like the Charité in Berlin, with his director, Professor Christian Drosten. At the base of the health system in Germany, in the districts, are about 400 health departments. We call it in Germany Gesundheitsämter. Here are the testing sites, and here they make the infection tracking. One of the Robert Koch Institute strategies are infection control with containment through isolation and quarantine, physical distancing, detecting the transmission routes, detecting corona clusters. That means accumulations of infected people. The actual quarantine rules at home or in hospital are actually corona positive people, 10 days quarantine from the day of the test. People with close contact to infected persons, 14-day quarantine. When they have a negative test, 10 days. Coming back from a country with high risk of corona, 10 days. With a negative corona test, 5 days quarantine. Protection and prevention. Recommendations are avoid unnecessary tourist trips. In these times in Germany, it's not easy to travel in foreign countries. Our foreign minister gives travel warnings for many, many countries. In everyday life, the people have to stick on some rules. In German language, we say AHA, Regel. In English, it means DHM rule, distance, hygiene, mask, and others. Next. You see, keep distance more than 1.5 meter. Next. Hygiene, wash your hands more than minimum 30 seconds. Next. Next. Wear a mask with nose and mouth. Next. Oh, yes. A good room ventilation is very important. Open your windows, get fresh air in it. Next. Avoid crowds. Next. Stay, if possible, at home. Next. Make a home office, if possible. Next. Don't go to work when you are sick. Next. Make a corona test if suspicious. Next. Use the Corona app. To the Corona app, I have a comment to our German Corona app. Because of our strict data protection in Germany, our app is like a teethless tiger. The German app is not comparable with the Corona app in the Far East countries like Taiwan or South Korea. Next. Get vaccinated when we have a vaccination. Next. Okay. How is the risk assessments for COVID-19 in Germany? You know, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic on March 11th, 2020. The basic principles of the Institute's assessment are: stop the transmission, observe numbers of severe cases of illness, how are the resources of our health system, for example, in the hospitals, in the emergency care units, what is the numbers of the ventilators in the emergency care units, numbers of specialized nursing staff. The numbers of cases are increasing again since end of August. After very good summer months came the second wave of infection. Because we have no really specific medicaments against the disease in the moment, the only chance is to avoid infects with corona for themselves and for other people. The only thing it to have contact restrictions and making tests. In Germany, we have a very good test capacity till now. The source of infection, get back, a little back. The source of infection in hotspots are mainly group events, big family celebrations, or outbreaks in retirement or nursing homes. The increasing numbers of infections require more intensive care treatment with overflowing intensive care units. Next. Some numbers and dashboards that it's a pity. The actual from today I have in my presentation, but what Pulak has is some days ago, but it's not so difficult. We have, I think, today more than 27,000 new diseases per day. Next. The 7 days incidence is the same, 149 per 100,000 people. The reproduction number is actually 1.1. It means 100 persons will infect another 100 or 110 persons. The next. The total number of COVID-19 patients are now, I think, 1.3 million, roundabout, in Germany. Next. Recovered patients, many, roundabout 950,000, actually. There are not the actual numbers. Number of active COVID-19 patients, about 300,000. Next. Patients in emergency care units, more than 4,500, roundabout. Death per day, it's a very high number for Germany. Now it's over 700. Oh, now today is over 700 plus per day. Next. The total number of deaths in context with COVID-19 is 16,606 or more, 70 or 20,000, I think, actually today. The next. Okay, not the actual curve, but you can see after in spring, the first infection wave, a good summer, and since end of August, again, increasing numbers. Next. In the emergency care units, we are coming to a bottom. It's quite full, I can say. Next. Okay. Restrictions in everyday life. There are some cultural differences between German people and people of other countries. We Germans are not used in the past to wear masks. Germans like to shake hands and to embrace their friends. But now, in the pandemic, we have new rules and new restrictions because of the pandemic. In Germany, we call it now the new normal, with new DHM rules and other recommendations. Keeping distance, pay attention to the hygiene rules, use a face mask, keep physical contact to a minimum. If necessary, meet other people outdoor. Since November 2020, we have a second lockdown. First, we called it a soft lockdown. Since yesterday, we have a hard lockdown in Germany, in all Länder, in all districts, with contact restrictions decided by the Chancellor and the German states. Now, we have contact restrictions. We can meet 5 people from 2 households. We have an exit lock in the nights till yesterday in some regions in Bavaria, for example, and in some cities of Germany. We have restrictions in the schools, in kindergarten, in university, in high schools. We have restrictions in restaurants, bars, pubs. They are locked. They are closed. Restrictions in churches, in mosques, synagogues. Restrictions in concert halls, opera houses, museums. They are closed. Restrictions in recreation facilities, in sport facilities. Next. Restrictions in shopping centers, supermarkets. Since yesterday, many shops are closed completely. And restrictions in everyday life, work, like people have to make home office if possible. And we have many people we call it in Germany, Kurzarbeit. In English, it's short-time work. We have restrictions in the retirement homes and in the nursing homes. Next. Okay, we're coming to the restrictions of our civil liberties. Civil liberties have a high priority in Germany. They are written in the basic law. We call it Grundgesetz. The majority of the German people agree with the necessary restrictions. But there are also some demonstrations against these restrictions in some cities. Next. Some people have conspiracy theories, and some people are, next, corona deniers. They don't believe that there is any pandemic. Next. Financial support in Germany. Our government gives financial support to the economy, to cultural institutes, to artists and creatives, to social facilities, to families, and to students money to bridge difficult time. Okay, vaccination. Next week we get die Zulassung, also get the go for the vaccinations, and I think at 27th December the vaccination project in Germany will start, and I will be a part of it. I'm on the list of the doctors who will make the vaccinations. We have a priority list in Germany for vaccination against SARS-CoV-2. I want to say it in some short words. Very high priority have people in Germany older than 80 years and people in nursing homes, nurses, employees in emergency care units, and in COVID-19 hospital wards. High priority have people with age between 76 and 80, medical staff with a high infection risk. A moderate priority are people with age between 71 and 75, and people with previous illness, or people in asylum accommodations or in homeless people shelter, or employees in public health service. Elevated priority have people with an age between 66 and 70, teachers, educators. Slightly elevated priority have people with an age between 60 and 65, retail workers, governmental employees, firemen, army, police, employees in public transportation and waste management. And last not least, all other people. And I think it will last many months till all people who want to be vaccinated can have their vaccination, because in Germany, the vaccination against SARS-CoV-2 is not compulsory, it's voluntary. But we hope that many people will get their vaccination because we need to achieve a so-called herd immunity in the population. And I think when 66% of the people will be vaccinated, then it will be good. Next. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter, for a very good talk. We learned a lot about the scenario in Germany, and I'm particularly interested because my daughter is now at the moment in Cologne. So it's very heartening that you will start the vaccination process in the before or just after 27th. I mean, just after Christmas. Okay. I hope that the Christmas party will not cause much damage before vaccination actually come into play. Anyway, I mean, let me see that what is the questions. Well, let me ask you one thing that I am little curious to know that how you will accomplish the vaccination. Will you go to the patient's house and give them the shot, or the patients have to go to some places to get vaccinated?
Both. There are some troops of infection doctors who go to the people who cannot come in a center, in the nurses' homes and in the old age homes and so on. Yeah? There are many troops who go to these people who cannot come in a center. But the most people who are good by field, they come to a center. And in every district in Germany, they have one or two centers, big halls with many doctors who make the infection. And they will work day and night, I think, on the weekend to have many, many vaccinations. But I think the problem is to get the injections, to get the vaccinations from the companies. We have a good staff. We are enough doctors for vaccination, but we need the vaccination injections, you know.
Mm-hmm. And just a following question would be that is it just like normal injections? I mean, for a layman, I mean, I'm just asking, or it requires a very specialized doctor to give the shot? Because I am thinking about my own country. Because if it is just like vaccination, the way we get it for tetanus and other things, normal compounders or healthcare staff, they give the shot. But do you think that this vaccination is just like this, or you need a specialized doctor to do this?
No, it's no problem. Let me, one moment. One moment. I think the compatibility of the injections is very good. The studies show it, and it's no problem to give. But we need at the BioNTech. The BioNTech vaccination will be the first. We need 2 injections. I think 3 weeks ago is the second. After the first comes the second. We need for each people 2 injections, and the vaccination has to be very strong cooling, and I think it's a little difficult to handle this, to bring the vaccinations to the centers with the coolings and so on.
Well, my question was whether this has to be done by the doctors or
Yes.
the nursing staff can do this.
Yes, a normal doctor can do it. I made
Okay.
many thousands of injections in my life. It's no problem.
I was asking that whether it is just like normal injections. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your wonderful talk. You educate us. I mean, what is the scenario in Germany and what is coming and how to mitigate these things. Thank you. I appreciate very much you joined us. We thank you so much. Okay, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I mean, our next speaker will be Dr. Debabrata Roy. Let me.
Pulagda,
Yes, sir.
one moment. Shushmita has an announcement, and before Professor Peter Schleicher also logs off, I think
Peter.
the announcement from her.
The German consulate, Mr. Auster, has joined. Maybe he will just say a few words before we move on to Dr. Debabrata Roy. Mr. Auster.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Doctores, I'm first of all apologize for being a little bit late in that, but you might have heard already before we had our Adventstee with our principal secretaries, with the Staatssekretär of the Foreign Office, and Calcutta had the honor to be one of only 5 missions worldwide to actively present. So that took a little bit of priority during the first speech. Again, Dr. Schleicher, my apologies for that I missed out on part of your speech. Other than that, I just wanted to greet you all and thank you very much for being with us these last few days before Christmas. And indeed, talking about the pandemic, it seems that we have now reached another crucial phase, as in much there is some light at the horizon with the vaccine coming. And we are really interested in hearing about that, but also not only about that, but also the talk of Dr. Chatterjee towards the end, which seems to be slightly including these topics, but not really focusing on it or focusing on a different aspect of that, which I think having all 4 of you speaking to us tonight is a very nice conclusion of this series of science lectures that the Consulate has been organizing for the last few years or so. My great thanks to Ms. Mandel for doing that and for organizing that, putting the things together, especially also during this new format, with this new format of video conferencing. In previous years, we used to do that live in our consulate. That wasn't possible, but as I said last time round already, also offers a chance now for people who are interested to follow us online from afar, and that is in that pandemic perhaps a slight advantage that we can live on. We can make the things a little bit more known to everybody and spreading the messages. So once again, many thanks already now. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all of you, and good luck with the work that you're doing. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the next few lectures. Thank you.
Good evening, Herr Auster. I didn't notice that you have joined. Great.
Here I
great.
am. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so I go to the next speaker. Again, I have to try my luck. Shushmita, would you like to make anything? Any comments?
No, I just wanted
All right.
after the Dr. Roy's PPT that can be uploaded by Ronjournia.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
only you have to upload his CV. Yeah, let's see if hopefully it will work this time. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't have the PPT ready for Debabrata, and I will tell
Yeah,
you
that's it.
to upload it. Okay, so let me share it.
Yeah.
So has it come? Okay. So, dear audience, our second speaker is Dr. Debabrata Roy. He is a very eminent cardiovascular specialist in our locality, means the place where I live, very close to that. Dr. Roy has an illustrious career, which you can see from the short CV. He has received many accolades and published 120 papers in national and international journals. Sometimes I wonder, as a teacher, as a researcher, I mean, it's extremely difficult for us to write 120 papers, and Debabrata is younger to me. And I mean, he must be working overnight. Otherwise, it is practically impossible, I mean, to pursue both things, his busy professional schedule and the academic work. Debabrata at the moment is serving as the Honorary General Secretary of Cardiology Society of India. He has a wide range of expertise related to heart. I mean, there are medical terms which I will not get into that. He has written book chapters and of course the publication I have mentioned. And he is a member of the writing group of Cardiological Society of India's position statement of STEMI, COVID-19 and heart failure acute MI care during COVID-19, and document on safety measures for some medical term which I find it extremely difficult to pronounce, but you can read it out. Well, Debabrata is a very nice person as well, and a very active person, and it's absolute pleasure for me to invite Debabrata. Please take your screen, and we are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Debabrata, Ranjan, please upload Debabrata's PPT.
Thank you, Professor Chingupta, for such a kind introduction, and wishing you a very good evening to all the dignitaries present, and Merry Christmas to you all in advance. I consider it my proud privilege to be a part of this prestigious scientific series that reflects the strong bond of friendship between India and Germany. So I should express my sincere thanks to the Consul General of Kolkata, Herr Oster, and his team for inviting me. Now, my first speaker has already told you about the basics of COVID-19 virus. And today, I'd give you a glimpse of the impact of COVID-19 on the cardiovascular health in India. May I have the next slide, please? So COVID-19 is a virus with very widespread manifestations. It can affect the heart directly by injuring the muscles. It can produce clogging of the arteries, producing myocardial ischemia and infarcts. It can increase the sympathetic discharge. That means it can increase your heart rate, your blood pressure, and several other neuroendocrine markers. It can induce an inflammatory state. It can promote an autoimmune response and can even interact with the adipose tissue, that is the fatty tissue that surrounds the heart. All this leads to myocardial injury in some form or other and can lead to affection of the heart, producing a decrease in its pumping function that is known in cardiology as cardiomyopathy, associated with dilatation of the heart. It can produce heart attacks. It can produce problem in heart filling and heart pumping. It can result in various forms of abnormalities of cardiac electrical circuits, leading to different forms of irregularities in cardiac rhythm, which we term as cardiac arrhythmia, including atrial fibrillation. Next slide, please. So, COVID-19 interacts pretty closely with the heart. As I have already told you, it can directly invade the cardiac muscles, the coronary arteries that supply the heart, and produce acute coronary syndrome. That means a form of, you can say, different forms of heart attacks. It can induce clogging of the coronary arteries, and it can damage the muscle, heart muscle directly. There are certain potential COVID-19 drugs that are in use. I am sure, if not in Germany, but in India, we are using it, like hydroxychloroquine. So these medicines themselves can produce abnormalities of cardiac electrical circuit. And it is very interesting to note that if you have certain cardiac risk factors or coronary artery disease itself, it can make you more susceptible to have this infection. It makes you more prone to have a more severe form of this disease, and it can make you more prone to develop severe heart failure. There were some doubts about using some common cardiovascular drugs like ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers, because they can raise the ACE2, that is the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors in the body, that basically serves as the receptor for COVID-19 as well. But now, both these drugs are proved to be beneficial even in COVID-19 scenario. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, as relates to heart, is closely associated with three clinical forms. Number one, different forms of heart attack, which in specific clinical terms, I should say ischemic heart disease or IHD. Second, heart failure. And third, cardiac arrhythmias or different irregularities of cardiac rhythm. So let us first see what are the issues with ischemic heart disease during COVID-19 pandemic in India. Of course, there is a fear in the mind of people to go to the hospital, which they consider as COVID days, and there is dearth of public transport during lockdowns and even in periods without lockdown. So there is an increase in time from onset of symptoms to first medical contact. We have noted a decrease in hospital admissions. There is a decrease in different sorts of interventions, that is angioplasties or bypass surgeries for acute coronary syndrome. And mainly we are relying on drugs, clot busters, as you know, in common terms, that is the thrombolytic agents for treating such conditions. And there is an increase in out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, Cardiology Society of India has started a registry involving 187 hospitals from 23 states, covering all the regions, that is the zones, North Zone, South Zone, Central, East, West, and involving 22 out of 26 chapters of Cardiological Society of India. Around 41,832 patients are enrolled, and like in all other countries of the world, we have also seen a drop in heart attack admissions across various parts in India, which range from 28 to 35%. Most of these patients, they present with a very severe form of heart attack, which actually really compelled them to come to the hospital, and most of them, they received thrombolytic therapy, and in tertiary centers where the facilities are available, they are also taken up for primary angioplasties. Next slide, please. What is interesting to note that this weekly admissions for heart attack has little correlation with a rise in new cases of COVID-19. The red line in the bottom depicts the number of new cases. The blue one depicts the STEMI admissions, that means the heart attack admissions in 2020, and the uppermost maroon line depicts the same in 2019. But what is interesting to note is that, next slide please, this weekly trends in heart attack admissions in every state, they have a close relationship with the degree of stringency with which the lockdown is imposed. Next slide, please, is almost linear. So more stringent is the lockdown, more is the decrease in MI. It can be primarily due to a dearth of transport. Public transport, you know, plays a very important role in patient transport in India. So dearth of public transport, the main factor, and maybe the apprehension in the mind of the patients about the hospitals acting as COVID dens. So this might be the reason of decrease of MI in lockdown states. Next slide, please. Now, what about the acute heart failure situations in India? This study, as you can see from the graph, has shown that there is a marked decrease in admissions from acute heart failure by as much as 69%. But what is important to note that among those who sought admission, majority, that is 96.7%, they present in the most severe form, which we clinically term as New York Heart Association Class 4 symptoms. These patients were more commonly male. They are more likely to have atrial fibrillation, impaired kidney function as reflected with low eGFR. They have a lower pumping function, that is the ejection fraction, and higher markers of heart failure, that is the NT-proBNP levels. Next slide, please. Now, coming to cardiac arrhythmia. Unfortunately, there is dearth of data regarding incidence or prevalence of cardiac arrhythmia in COVID-19. However, we know from other studies that genesis of cardiac arrhythmia is multifactorial. It is related to hypoxia due to lung involvement, due to direct injury of the heart in form of myocarditis or myocardial ischemia. There can be effect of different medicines like hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin that we use commonly. But what is interesting to note that even diarrhea due to involvement of GI tract by COVID-19 can lead to loss of fluid volume, and affection of kidneys can lead to imbalance of the electrolytes in our body and can produce arrhythmia. Commonly, we have different types of tachy or bradyarrhythmias, that means with higher or lower heart rates, and we have certain interval prolongations and certain dangerous arrhythmias like tots at the pump. Next slide, please. So this is a list of common arrhythmias that are associated with COVID-19, and I don't think I bother you with the details. And to note is that the systemic inflammation as well as local tissue injury involving the heart plays the greatest role in the genesis of such arrhythmias. Next slide, please. So what about cardiac surgeries? So long we have discussed about the medical problems. So what about the surgical problems? So this is another Indian study which have examined the impact of COVID-19 on clinical decision making in cardiac surgical practice. And they have noted that if you have any sort of cardiovascular disease, the mortality will rise by almost 40% if you have COVID-19 infection. With pre-existing cardiovascular disease, you will have a mortality of 11%. And if you have an acute heart injury, the death rate can be as high as 69%. Patients, what is important to note is that patients with pre-existing cardiac conditions who may, if you delay the surgery by several weeks in such patients waiting for their report, negative report to come, may lead to their death. They may suffer from lethal cardiac events. So what we do about such patients? Next slide, please. So for all patients with planned surgery, we need to do one of these tests that are available, a CT scan. Actually, before the RT-PCR tests were widely available, this has been the mainstay of assessing the patients whether they have a COVID-19 infection or not by seeing the CT scan of their chest and noting whether they have those typical changes attributable to COVID-19 infection. Especially for, you know that RT-PCR, the results, they take some time. So in many hospitals, it has been the routine protocol of doing high resolution CT scan of chest to see the typical COVID-19 findings before subjecting them to surgery. Next slide, please. And if you need to do any intervention, any surgery in such patients, you need to have proper protection equipment. And this is a very, very important lesson for us, the medical community. So it depends on the different levels of care. If you are going to operate on the patient, which involves generation of aerosols, you need to have the full set of PPE, including the N95 mask. And please don't forget to put a mask on the patient as well. For the other staffs in the emergency or the circulating staff, you can do away with a surgical mask. But in the ICU, again, N95 mask is mandatory along with other preventive protocols. So, till now, I have detailed on the various clinical facets of cardiac manifestations of COVID and how it has affected our practice. Now, as you all know, India is going to be the capital of cardiovascular disease shortly. And we are really trying hard to cut on the cardiovascular risk factors like tobacco, like obesity, like alcohol consumption. And I think it will be very interesting to examine the effect of COVID-19 on such risk factors. Next slide, please. So, what about the tobacco use? Tobacco, you know, it impacts the lungs predominantly and also other organs, lowers the immunity, and now makes the people vulnerable to COVID-19. And it is only expected that the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare issued a quick line, has started a quick line to help with tobacco de-addiction. Now, this is a very interesting study that is, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, which has examined the impact of coronavirus infection and lockdown on tobacco use from 4 states of India. And it is very interesting to note that despite all the government efforts, as much as 67% of population are not aware about association between tobacco and coronavirus. But we should thank God, you know, Indians are God-loving and God-fearing people. So why? Because even they don't know about this association, they have stopped tobacco use due to lockdown. That is 51%. Very interesting. And you should also note that among those who are aware about this association, unfortunately, also among them, among those people who are aware of the danger, only 51% has stopped tobacco. So the danger is still lurking. Next slide, please. So what about other lifestyle-related behaviors like eating, like physical activity, like sleep pattern? This study from India done on 995 participants have shown that the eating behavior has shifted more to fast foods. The physical activity, understandably, has ebbed. The sleeping pattern has changed. The depression has increased, which is a bad news. Why this is a bad news? Next slide, please. Because this leads to obesity. And obesity and COVID-19, they participate very closely in a vicious cycle. Obesity predisposes to more severe COVID-19 infections. In fact, obese people are at 70% more risk of developing COVID-19. And COVID-19 itself, due to its direct effect and due to the secondary effect of lockdown, can increase stress, can induce sleep disorders, can activate reward centers, promote sedentary behaviors, promote fast food, processed food consumption, low sun exposure, etc., etc., etc. And don't forget the rise of intake of sweetened beverage consumption, which again leads to more incidence of obesity. And thus the sad story for India progresses. Next slide. This is another factor that is not much discussed, unfortunately. We are rejoicing green air, green fields during COVID lockdown times, totally forgetting that the lockdown leads to more increase in cooking at the house, which can lead to an increase in household air population. In fact, you can see on the left-hand slide that there has been a significant increase in household air pollution in India due to cooking fuels during the lockdown time. And please note that this is true not only for urban areas, it is true also for the rural areas. So don't think that if you belong to the rural area, you are free of the impact of household air pollution. And you can see from the graph down, this is a very eminent global study published in Lancet that has shown that the effect of air pollution, that is, you can see on the bars on the left-hand side, is much more than the effect of tobacco use. So don't think that if you don't use tobacco, you are safe. Now, next slide, please. So COVID is a menace that haunts you for a long time. Even after initial recovery, there is risk of cardiac events. There can be sudden death. So many of our doctors died from this sudden cardiac arrest. There can be increased chance of irregularities of cardiac rhythm, that is termed as VT, SVT, bradycardia. There can be persistence of myocardial injury and heart failure. And all this can lead to an impaired quality of life. Next slide, please. But what is important to note is that COVID-19 is first emerging as an independent cardiac risk factor. This is a very, very new concept and very relevant to the Indian population. You know, Indian populations, they suffer from a metabolic syndrome that is a conglomeration of obesity, high triglyceride, high blood pressure, low HDL, greater waist circumference. And you can see these light shaded zones are the are the factors attributable to the metabolic syndrome, and the dark shaded areas are those attributable to COVID-19. And basically, these various parameters, cardiac muscle damage, expression of inflammatory markers, skeletal muscle damage, brain involvement, lung involvement, direct involvement of the kidneys, direct involvement of the liver, all these things that we used to know as components, standard components of metabolic syndrome, they are also present with COVID-19. And this is something dangerous revelation for us. Next slide, please. So this means that whenever you see a patient with cardiac injury in COVID-19, you should not only concentrate on the acute management, you should also follow up the patients during the convalescent phase at least for 2 to 6 months by doing the relevant investigations like ECG, echo, if needed, cardiac monitoring. And if some abnormalities are detected, you should subject these patients to more advanced imaging protocols. And we need to set up several clinics for this. Next slide, please. So during COVID time, the Cardiology Society of India has taken an initiative to introduce an app termed the CSI Happy Heart app, which is freely available at Google Play Store, which gives you your individual risk score and advise you according to your risk score. Also advise you regarding when to follow up and when to go to the doctor. And I request all the dignitaries present to download this app, because we have formulated this app based on a study that is submitted for publication in a reputed journal that was done in 10 districts of our state, West Bengal, among the around 4,000 school children, which has direct and indirect beneficiaries numbering to 12 lakhs. And we have given some basic teachings regarding lifestyle modification that we say as 10 commandments, and it was published in 10 Indian languages and as well as in English. Next slide, please. Now let us come to certain other issues. During the COVID time, there has been a stocking up of drugs, and as you can see from this data that is published in the Economic Times, mainly the drugs that were stocked were respiratory, cardiac, and anti-diabetics. This, of course, has led to an increase in the price, mainly for the anti-diabetic and the cardiac drugs. And this is a big issue. Why? Next slide, please. Because Indians have a low health insurance coverage. You know about Ayushman Bharat, you know about Shastra Shati. Now you please look at the data presented by the Union Finance and Health Ministry in 4th June 2020. Till then, the total number of COVID-19 cases has been 2.17 lakhs. So, of them, only 8,500 made an insurance claim. And on further search, it is found that only 4% of COVID-19 patients were getting admitted their health insurance. So this is a matter of great concern, because if you consider the admission cost for an average patient with severe COVID-19 in India, it can range anywhere between 3 to 8 lakh rupees. So this is a matter of great concern. And here I have not included it in my slide, but I just like to draw your kind attentions to the plight of the doctors, to the plight of the healthcare workers who are working in this pandemic situation with limited resources, including limited availability of PPE. Owing to adverse postings in the social media, owing to lack of awareness, owing to unnecessary apprehension on part of the patients and the patient party, on above this duress on part of the doctors and healthcare workers, they are often subjected to assault by the patient party, which I consider as a very sad event to happen. Next slide, please. So now about some positive talks. So what has changed in India regarding healthcare delivery, especially cardiac health? It is the advent of telemedicine. Why? I have stressed again and again that the Indians, they want to avoid hospital because they consider the hospitals as COVID den. So this is one of the major reasons of the advent of telemedicine. And there is no risk of transmission, of course. Next slide, please. And you can see this data from Statista, and it is showing that irrespective of the age group, and you see even those who are over 75 years of age, they have shown an willingness to book telehealth consultation with the doctors. So this is a burgeoning field in Indian medicine. So I am coming to my last slide. Next, please. So how are the patients in India with cardiovascular disease or risk factors are coping? So there are currently 79 million diabetics and 200 million hypertensives in India. And you can imagine how these comorbidities can predispose to COVID-19 infection. The infection itself, as I have demonstrated, can increase the behavioral risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So this is a serious issue to consider both at government and non-government levels. There has been a substantial reduction of patients with acute cardiac conditions like acute heart attacks or heart failure attending emergency departments. But there is no reason to rejoice because this might be a reflection of apprehension on part of the patients and lack of public transportations. It would be very important to see how the women and the elderly Indians are doing in this COVID-19 pandemic, because these are the population who traditionally avoid hospitals. And last but not the least, given the economic difficulties and imposed during lockdown and COVID-19 scenario, and the additional efforts needed to obtain drug, there has to be some poor compliance with anti-diabetic, anti-hypertensive, and lipid-lowering drugs, which are going to influence cardiovascular health in India. However, the bright streak is that the pandemic is leading to the growth of telemedicine. Next slide, please. So, thank you. This is my live slide. And just to remind you again that patients with heart conditions must take extra care. Thank you.
Thank you, Debabrata. Thank you. Ranjan, can you go out of this? Just come out of this. Thank you, Debabrata, for a wonderful talk, very informative, and I'm particularly like to thank you for the app you have prepared for us. We really didn't know. I would certainly check it out and download in my handy. And the kind of data you have provided are very, very useful. On a lighter note, I sincerely believe that heart is the symbol of passion. But when I listen to the heart specialist, my passion becomes panic. So, so obviously, I mean, but this is real life. And before I go to the question, Ayan Banerjee has shoot you a question. I just want to ask a simple thing, that are our doctors in Kolkata ready for the vaccine to be implemented on the patients, or have you developed any protocol that if the vaccine comes tomorrow, how you will organize the thing?
Yeah, I think Professor Shengupta, that thing has been planned on a central basis. And that recent newspaper news that we have a very short, we are very short of doctors in India, especially at the rural level, and for that they are planning even to involve the Ayush workers to deliver this injection. I believe that it is nothing anything very special about giving those shots. That is just like administering a simple injection. As far as I know, we are yet to see such a procedure. So once we gather experience, I think many more novel things can be done regarding the delivery.
Okay, thank you. And the question is from Ayan Banerjee. He is from Aizer, Kolkata. it is his observation that he has noted a significant increase in the occurrence of MCI after COVID-19 sets in. Can people with no pre-existing cardiovascular issues also suffer sudden heart attacks due to acute infection?
Yeah, I think I have already stated in my lecture, because COVID-19 can directly involve the cardiac muscles and also can directly influence the cardiac electrical circuit, and both of these can lead to sudden cardiac death due to arrhythmia or due to anything, maybe acute heart attack.
Well, Debabrata, just I like to make a comment on your observation. This is nice that our the insurance cover of the patients is very, very low, about 4%, what you shown. I tell you the real life thing. Many of us have, insurances, and we were not aware that this will happen this year. So the insurance company, barring few, they have decided not to pay for COVID patient, and that's a big, big problem. That's a very big problem, and the kind of insurance we have at Jadavpur University, and then our university has to sit with the insurer and assure us that they have to cover. This is a real life problem, I tell you. It's not only that people don't have insurance.
Professor Shengupta, I think the government has recently put a stricture on the insurance companies so that they cannot deny insurance benefits to COVID-19 patients.
So it is now included for all the.
Right. Yeah, they cannot deny giving benefits to COVID-19 patients.
Okay. Thank you so much, Debabrata, for an excellent talk, very informative, and information about the website, which certainly we'll use and spread. And thank you so much for being with us and giving us time from your busy schedule. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all the dignitaries, and I wish a very good night and good evening to you all. And I think I have to attend a few of my patients who are waiting. So I will be leaving the meeting with all your kind permissions.
No, Debabrata, just hold on. Mr. Auster, would you like to make a few comments on this?
Well, thank you very much for that possibility, but I think I'm really, as a lawyer, not in a position to make any relevant comments to that. So I just want to thank Dr. Roy for his speech, and thank you very much for that. I found it very enlightening, and I hope that he will also have a beautiful holiday season, and very happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Wishing. Thank you.
Dr. Chatterjee, are you there? It's pull up. Dr. Chatterjee, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Yes, good evening.
Okay, welcome to the show. Seeing you after a long time. I hope that you can recognize me.
I can indeed.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us. And our next speaker, I first again try to upload. Claudia,
it's already
Hülso,
uploaded. You don't have
and
to
she is she actually grew up in Bremen. She's basically a pediatric, and you can see her career graph. I just want to share one thing in the last few lines is really interesting, which she also narrated a few days back when I interacted with her regarding this talk, that she went to Berlin to do her doctoral thesis. And during that time, COVID was hit. So he was caught and given the responsibility of 3 test centers. I mean, from the general perception of the common people and possibly to some doctors, being in charge of a test centers, in fact, entails a lot of risk. But looking at her, I never felt that he is really afraid of these things. And with this little note, Claudia, herzlichen Willkommen.
Dankeschön.
Just I come
So,
out of this. Just I come out of this. Let me just come out of this.
okay.
Okay. Please.
Can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Not
No.
yet. It said something about a problem. Okay. How about now? Firefox.
Ranjan, do you have the PPT of Claudia?
No. She didn't provide the PowerPoint presentation.
No, we do not
Yeah.
have this. In case she sends us, we can
Do you have
upload.
Shishida? Do you have?
No,
No,
we
we
don't.
do not have this, Pipi.
I think she has some connection issues, so she would be fine. Because in the trial session, she was able to upload.
Yeah.
So,
That is what I can remember.
Yes, she has just logged out, so I think you just have to wait for a few seconds before she logs in again. Yeah. This is always the problem when you do it in a web-based sessions that we haven't faced in real sessions.
It always happens, you know. I mean, this is new normal. I mean, it will take some more time to get used. Great. Claudia, full screen. Claudia, can you hear me? Claudia, your microphone is off.
Hi.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm doing it with a different computer than the last time we did it, but it seemed to be enough. So I'm going to try again. Can you
It's coming.
Can you see?
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry for the delay.
No, doesn't matter. You make it full screen.
Is it not full screen yet?
No.
What?
Just click on the little peg-shaped icon at the bottom.
Yeah. Nope. That's not what I want. Bildschirm ausblenden. I do have it as a full screen now.
Yeah, but anyway, you can start talking.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Sorry.
matter.
I'm trying to make it.
To click each and every slide in that case. Okay.
Thanks for bearing with me. I have a slide So I actually studied at Charité. So I've been here for a long time, but I actually worked in a pediatric clinic that was not Charité. And I came to the Tropical Institute of Medicine to do my doctoral thesis. So I'm a medical doctor, but I don't officially have the academic title of doctor yet. I'm working on that, and that actually is a link to India because I'm doing research on an Indian group of people who were sick with malaria, and I'm looking at their hemoglobin and looking for some abnormalities. But I was working in the traveling medicine, so I was telling people which vaccinations to get when they were traveling abroad, but that shut down with the COVID pandemic, and now I am in charge of, by now, 2 testing sites for employees at Charité, and I'm going to give you a little insight of how things went down in Berlin. So I hope this is informative. I like maps, so I'm always going to show you a map, just in case you forgot where Berlin is on the map. It's the little blue spot. I'm from this little gray spot here.
Actually, sorry, Claudia, sorry to interrupt. I mean, since we cannot see the full screen, you have to click on each and every slide before you talk, because we are not seeing the full screen. So you are still in the slide number 1.
Okay.
So simply you click on the second.
Okay. Can you see that now?
Not yet.
Claudia, what has happened is that you have probably shared not the full screen, but you have shared the presentation. So can you just... Yeah, thank you.
Now it has come. Okay. So you see Berlin on the map now?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is the 3rd slide now?
It's second slide.
Still the 2nd slide.
Yeah.
Now it's the 3rd?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a map of Berlin. And as most of you probably know, Berlin is the biggest city in Germany. And when we talk about biggest city, we talk about 3.7 million inhabitants. And Berlin is subdivided into 12 different districts. And since we are a federal republic, we also subdivide everything. And there's also 12 Gesundheitsämter, which Peter already mentioned in his talk. And then on the medical side, we have a total of 15 hospitals who take care of severely ill COVID cases at the moment. And apparently the total capacity of Berlin with intensive care beds for those 3.7 million inhabitants is 1,200. We have one more institution that is relevant for us, which is the Amt für Gesundheit und Soziales, which is also a public health institute, but is also responsible for the entire city of Berlin. So you let me know when the next slide shows up, and then I know when to talk.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, this is...
Okay, so I took some data from the Landesamt of Gesundheit und Soziales and put it in a graph.
No.
And I think this...
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and this shows pretty clearly how the cases increase. This is the total number of cases. So it all contains also the patients that have already recovered. But if you look at the curve, we were good for a really long time. It started in March, now in mid-December. So it's a total of 9 months that are being depicted here. And up until, this is about the end of September, we were doing fine. And just to put it into context, we did start the strict lockdown on the 16th of March, which Peter has also mentioned. So basically everything shut down. The only things that were kept open were supermarkets, drugstores, pharmacies, but not much more than that. So you basically could be home or you could go for a walk in the park. There was not much more that you could do. And with that, we had a pretty quiet summer. So everybody was patting each other on the back, being really happy that numbers are like, they were in check. Everything was under control. But then we see this really deep increase just in the last 2 months. And while we were already on this part where the infection increased by a lot, the politicians decided to put us into a light lockdown. And light basically in Berlin meant that restaurants were closed, that you couldn't sit down and eat, that you couldn't go to a cafe. Basically everything, like shops were kept open. And so that was just the idea of, we've learned so much in the first lockdown, now we don't take the hard measures. But the numbers don't agree with that, because you see nothing happened here, it just kept climbing up. And as Peter has also mentioned before, we are in another strict lockdown beginning yesterday. So we will have to see what how the numbers develop after the beginning of the strict lockdown. Because what we know now is that the patients that are getting infected today, they will be on the intensive care wards in like 2 to 3 weeks. So bear in mind that everything, like the severe cases, a lot of mild cases just recover, but the severe cases, they will end up in ICUs in the coming 2 to 3 weeks. And just to give you an idea where we are at the moment, so those are the actual numbers from yesterday. We do have a total number of 82,000 cases and almost 1,000 deaths related to COVID. And the very numbers for Charité, the university clinic where I'm working at the moment, is that we have 236 patients admitted because of COVID. And out of these, 132 are currently being treated on the intensive care units, which is quite a high number. And out of these, again, 98 are intubated and need to be on a ventilator because they have acute respiratory failure. And the last number, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this procedure, but this last number I find the scariest, because ECMO is short for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. And that means nothing else that everything has failed regarding your respiratory support, and they put in big cannulas into your veins and your arteries that pumps your blood out of your body. It is being oxygenized in a machine and then pumped back into your body. So this is the last thing you can do. After this, there's nothing. And 34 is a really, really high number, because you can imagine that a procedure this invasive also takes a lot of trained staff. It's very high demand on care their healthcare workers. So this is not something you can do in big numbers everywhere, and also probably not with very frail older people. So I know that from last week, they actually created 4 more spots to do this. And also it's important to know that 50% of the COVID patients are actually in Charité. So there's probably almost the same number of patients in other hospitals at the moment. So, and this is an all-time high. We have not had numbers this high ever during the pandemic. Just to compare, like during the peak of the first wave, like the max we had was around 70 people on invasive respiratory support. So that is not very reassuring. And another map. We actually were thinking about, do we have an even spread of COVID cases? And we really don't. And these numbers were also provided by the public health institutions. And you can see that the district in Berlin with the lowest numbers, which is Treptow-Köpenick down here, had only a third of the cases of Mitte, which is the #1 area with the most cases, where I actually live as well. And then followed by Tempelhof-Schöneberg and Neukölln. And there are different theories why there is such an increase in cases in those areas. And one is, for example, that in the center of Berlin, there's a lot of young people with a lot of social interactions and a lot of contacts. And contacts basically means you'll have a higher risk. And then there's also areas, which Neukölln is one of, with very, very big families. And again, it's a lot of contact with families, and context means risk, basically. Berlin is famous for many things, also for being inventive, but also for its club culture, if you haven't known. And this is basically the most well-known club in Berlin. It's a techno club. You always have a very long line. They did shut down the first lockdown, but they were quite inventive. They are an art gallery now. You still don't get in because everything was sold out like really, really fast. So nothing has changed on that end. Then there's another well-known club. It doesn't look like much, which is called Kit. And we've seen in the early beginning of the pandemic, people were making a fortune with selling masks and selling hand sanitizers when everything was sold out. And the equivalent of that now is to put up walk-in testing sites. So actually, you can go to this club now, not to party, but to actually get a COVID test. And you can both a PCR test, but also a rapid antigen test. And why I started talking about clubs is this third club, which is way less well known. It's called Trompete, but it gained some fame early in the pandemic because that was probably the first super spreading event in Berlin. And the team of Christian Drosten did a paper on this, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. I just want to say that Christian Drosten is head of the virology department at Chatterjee, and he happens to be an expert on coronavirus. He has already worked on the first COVID pandemic in 2003. So he was the first one who put up the PCR test for this new coronavirus. And he has done, for anybody who speaks German and who has not listened to this podcast, he's done a podcast early on and basically explaining COVID to the general public. And he's done a great job. And I would call him the new national heroes for the people who are on the side of science. He's probably the biggest enemy of the people who are not on the side of science. Like we do have a lot of people who are, they don't believe in COVID. He actually got, I had to look this up because it's a very long word in English. He actually, because of his work with the COVID pandemic, he got the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republics. He got like one of the highest decorations. And his team looked at an outbreak in this Trompete club. And what happened was that in early March, the Gesundheitsämter were tracing down contacts of like all the new COVID cases, and they found a link with a group of positively tested patients to a club visit that happened on the 29th of February. So they went in and they looked at what actually happened in that time and how many people were there. And it's important to notice that this all happened before infection prevention measures were in place. So there was no distance keeping, there were no masks. So everybody was just moving as if nothing had happened. And just some rough numbers about this outbreak. There were 74 cases. They were able to obtain 64 data sets, and they were also able to interview 44 people. And this is just like the rough club. It is in a basement. It's not ventilated very well. The windows are being shut. It is small. And what they also saw then in this very nice graph is they looked at the people that attended 3 different events, and each event had roughly around 150 people there plus staff, and they categorized first generation cases, which means people that were tested positively for COVID that had attended one of these 3 events, and then also second generation cases did not go to the club, but actually had contact to the people who got COVID probably in that club. And there are 2 suspected patient 0 cases. And one is this blue one here, who is a guest that had symptoms before, and then a worker who developed symptoms pretty early after the first event. And what they found was a couple of things, like the median age was 30. They also had somebody who was 2 years old, so I'm not really sure what kind of club that is. The infection was evenly distributed between genders, and a rather short incubation period of median of 4 days. And they also found that the highest risk group was the staff, which also makes sense because they have a lot more interactions with all the different people attending. And the one thing that I found really, really interesting, which supports the theory of super spreading events, was that they did a whole genome sequencing of 17 samples. And what they found is that 11 samples were completely identical. So they looked at the genetic order of the viruses, and 11 the same. 6 samples had very minor differences in their genome, which, like, you can't say 100% that they were the same, but with the amount of differences, they can be explained by sporadic mutation events. So this also supports the idea that indoor events with poor ventilation can lead to super spreading events. And now I'm going to make a bit of and tell you a little bit about what I do every day. So I'm employed in the Institute of Tropical Medicine and Global Health. And what I'm doing at the moment is I'm working at CUSMA, and that stands for Corona-Untersuchungsstelle für Mitarbeiter. So it's a testing site for employees of our 3 hospitals that are spread over 3 different campuses, which you can see here in the pictures. And I'm actually in charge of the one on the left and the one on the right. And just to give you a rough idea, Charité has 15,500 employees. So there's a lot of people, and they have a capacity of 3,000 beds. And as I said, it's spread over 3 campuses. And so the idea of this whole CUSMA thing is to make sure that healthcare workers have easy access to testing, they have fast results, and the ideas are to prevent outbreaks, but also to monitor the infection rates among staff in the hospital. So you actually know what's going on. So you have the normal channel for patients, but you also have the opportunity to test employees. And you need a special place for that because you want to protect the data of the healthcare workers. So what you want to prevent is that I can check your test results and maybe violate your privacy. So we actually, we were stomped out of the ground from one day to the next, kind of. And to give you an idea of how our work has been, I put up a graph about the total amount of tests we do in a day, and I just picked at random Wednesdays since April, because that is when I took over. And you can see in the 3 different colors, the 3 different hospitals. And as you can see, there's days in the beginning where we hardly had any tests. So if you see here, this is like 50 tests. This is really, really little. And there are some artificial results that we caused, because we also did 2 rounds of testing on basically anybody who wanted to be tested. And we did both a PCR swab, but we also took blood to check for antibodies. And one of them is the really, really big one. And another one is this smaller one. Again, is just the total number of tests. It's not the number of people who actually tested positively, because all my bosses don't give out those numbers easily. So I couldn't get for the whole period of time, I couldn't get all the results. But what we definitely notice is that in the past 2 months, testing has gone up, and also positive testing has gone up. And in the beginning, no, I'm still talking about this here. In the beginning, we were pretty generous with testing. And now we actually notice that we have to be a little bit more restrictive and actually stick to the guidelines to keep the testing possibility up, because we have had the situation that the big lab that does the tests for us, they were so stacked up and behind that it took 4 days for us to get the test results. And that, of course, is not ideal, because if you suspect an infection, you need to know fast. And it used to be about 24 hours, but we were up to 4 days. And it's a situation where you have to react fast. So what we did in that moment is we started doing antigen tests, like the fast antigen tests, which is a good thing, but you also need to use them in the proper setting. So it has a really, really good value for people who are actually symptomatic, because you do need a certain viral load for it to turn positive. And if they don't turn positive, but do have a PCR at the same time, and the PCR is positive, then you can assume that the amount of virus and virus load is not so very high, so they might not be as contagious, even though that they are positive. So what we do now is we do antigen tests and PCRs at the same time. And that works quite well. And this has been a really big learning experience, because it has been learning by doing and testing to situations. And one thing that we fortunately saw the entire time was that personal protective gear works. And we are in the lucky situation that we have enough for everybody. And our numbers show that there's basically no transmission of the virus from patient to healthcare workers. The other way around, it's not so, well, it's very obvious. Like, everybody working here sees the potential infection in patients, but as soon as they talk to their colleagues or their friends, they're not as cautious anymore. So we have a lot of infections from colleagues to colleagues to colleagues, and we actually have clusters in the clinics where we can see that actually the healthcare workers transmitted the virus amongst each other, but it's basically not amongst patient to healthcare workers. So another thing we've learned is triage is key, because as I said, we had these troubles with the amount of samples that were sent to the lab that they could not process. So we are in the situation now that we see that we have to be a bit more strict about who is getting tested, and it's not enough to just walk up and be like, oh, I'm really worried. So we need to be a bit more strict about it. That is like the recent development. Another thing, communication is really hard, which I found. I'm a pediatrician, so I'm used to communicating in creative ways. It's always straightforward, but it's funny to see adult grown-ups that have a medical background but still don't stick to the rules as soon as they are on a work break with their work and don't see the danger anymore. So we have to talk to a lot of different people to make sure that people stick to the rules, and also to make sure that things run smoothly. It's not just one swab, send it to the lab, and that's it. It's actually it's a whole, like, it's a lot to talk. And also logistics are not that easy. So our lab at first did individual PCRs for every single patient, but then they noticed that there were more samples being sent. So now they started pooling samples. So you put it in the tube, and there's a little bit of buffer in the bottom that actually is used to do the PCR. So what they do is they take, for example, 5 samples, pour them like a little bit of each together, check if it turns out positive for COVID-19. And if it doesn't, all these 5 people that belong to the samples, they're negative. But if this pooled sample size turns out positive, then they have to go back and test each one individually. And Charité was one of the university clinics who kept the university education program open. So we did have to test a lot of students, which soon got too much. So we did have to send them to a different lab in Frankfurt. That caused all sorts of trouble. So it's really not that easy as you would think. And also one thing that we did notice is we need better digital solutions for the results, and for the results being available to the people. Because now it's the way that positive patients, they do get a call, and then we send the negative results to the work email address, but not everybody has a work email address, so they need to be called as well. And in times where we do 200 testings, which we did yesterday, it's impossible to call all of them. So if anybody has good ideas for digital solutions, they're really welcome and really needed. And this is the end of my talk, and I leave you with the sunrise of this morning. One of the testing sites is on the 21st floor, and if you look closely, you can see the Berliner Dom right under this cloud, and of course the TV tower. And I'm ready for questions.
Yeah. And I have a question for you from Professor Subrata Karmakar. But before that, I just want to make a personal note on your graph.
Yeah.
The graph what you showed is really interesting, that you had a wonderful summer and then the problem started in the winter time. And whatever little experience, or not little, is, I mean, I stayed in Germany for 3 years and keep going and coming. I know the Europeans, I mean, during the summertime, they mostly spend outside.
Yeah.
In the winter time, they are forced to get in. And we also had a celebration time in October and November here in India. But after that, there was no such. So, I mean, clubbing these things, a question comes to my mind, just correct me whether I'm thinking right, that ventilation could be a real problem. I mean, it's not only the physical distancing, but poor ventilation is the main culprit. Because in the streets of India, you know, every other day there are demonstrations of 50,000, 60,000 people. But there is no such a sharp rise, and we
Yeah.
the celebration time. So a lot of people just came together, but we didn't have a spike. But is it the ventilation which is the main culprit, or no?
Well, it's one of the things. We know that if you keep rooms, also small rooms, ventilated well, that will prevent a lot of infection. But also with all the respiratory viruses, we do see surges in winter, and that also is the reason, or one of the reasons for that is the temperature that drops and the dry air, because in the cold, you have your mucous membranes, and they're there for a reason. You have a first line of defense of your immune system, and it works the best when it's warm and when the air is not dry. Because if the mucous membranes dry out, it's easier for the virus to attack. So it's several different mechanisms that cause the rise in winter, and definitely ventilation is one, and being inside, but also temperatures and the moisture of the air is also an important factor.
Okay. Okay, so the question from Professor Karmakar is, he has actually two questions. The first question is, are children really more immune to COVID-19 relative to the adults? This is the first question.
Should I answer that, or do you want to read this? Okay. We actually did conduct a study in schools twice, once before the summer holidays and one just recently in November. And in the first one, we did go to different age groups. We went to daycare with small children, to primary schools, and also to like 16-year-olds. And in the first group, in the first round, we hardly saw any cases. And now we did see a few more, but more with the teenage children. So they are basically physically, they are adults. And one of the theories is that, as has been said before, the ACE receptor is one of the entrance gate for the COVID virus into the body. And there's one theory that has not been proven yet, but it says that that children, and smaller children in particular, do have way less of these receptors, which makes them less likely to contract the virus. So we haven't found out really why. It still is it indicates that children don't get it as easily as adults.
The second question is the question of all of us, particularly who are non-medical persons. Can mRNA vaccine interfere with our genetic code negatively?
It's mRNA, so it's not like your cell has the nucleus and you have your DNA in the nucleus. The mRNA is not in the nucleus. So the risk for that is minor. Like, this is not going to work because mRNA is really unstable and it's either translated into proteins or broken down.
Great
So
hope.
the risk,
Great, because there is a fear not only in India, in many parts of the world, that many people fear that getting a vaccination may lead to some long-term problems. But you are assuring us that this is very unlikely situation.
it's very, very unlikely.
Okay.
And the benefit is here and the risk is down there somewhere.
Okay. So life, living is also a risk. So that little risk one has to take.
Never zero, that's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudia, for your wonderful talk. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
So, our next speaker, Ranjan, can you see the PPT, or I have to? Get in. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Dear audience,
we can.
I have
We
the
can.
great pleasure of inviting Professor Dr. Sandip Chatterjee. He is a very, very eminent neurosurgeon in Kolkata. It is my biased view, could be that there is hardly any person in Kolkata who doesn't know his name. He has received many accolades, many recognition from reputed international medical institute, including FSCS, FRS. And other than being an excellent doctor in different divisions of neurosurgery, he has written 7 scientific publications and 20 book chapters. I had the opportunity to interact with him for a prolonged time, 2-3 months, and I saw him. How occupied he is as a doctor. I really wonder. How could he squeeze out so much of time to write so many scientific publications? The last line is really interesting. When I was going through these things, I was wondering. First, I didn't know, Dr. Chatterjee, that you are a photographer, and I also have a hobby. A photographer as a hobby, and then a founder member of Calcutta Debating Circle. And I tell you that on a lighter note, that lesser mortal like me would never dare to open a debate with a doctor or a lawyer. But when he is debating, when he is in that society, that means that he has debated with many people. That means that he is, his mind is broad enough to accommodate the alternative views, and he has the tolerance to listen. And as a patient party, I can tell you that this is precisely my observation about his behavior. It's a great pleasure for me, Dr. Chatterjee, to welcome you to give a talk.
Thank you. Can I share my screen, do you
please.
think? Once.
Yes, it has come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see my slide?
You just click on the height. You just click on the height so that this unnecessary icon goes out.
Ja. Okay, good evening. Danke für diese Möglichkeit. Ich kann Deutsch sprechen, aber nicht gut. Ich kann Deutsch verstehen, Kann ich bitte heute English sprechen? And I will speak to you today about neck and arm pain in the new normal era. I am not going to speak about COVID because I am one of those optimists in this world who believe that if you continuously cry during the day because you cannot see the sun, then your tears stop you from seeing the stars in the night sky as well. So instead of lamenting and narrating about COVID and COVID and COVID again, I'm going to share with you something completely different. Neck and arm pain. What causes neck pain and arm pain in the new normal era? And I have to tell you, don't expect anything very brainy from a neurosurgeon. Brain surgeons are not brainy people. After all, brain surgeons for their entire working life require only one brain, and that's the brain of their patient. The impact of the coronavirus to this new normal has been that 88% of organizations have encouraged or required employees to work from home. 31% of people globally said that COVID-19 was the trigger point to begin allowing remote work from home. And that on a long-term basis, they consider this a very viable option to traveling or commuting to work every day. So what happened when they decided to be on a virtual network, as we are indeed this evening? This is what happened. You had people that were talking to different groups, different times, on different computers, and you can see the different mouses. I'm not sure whether mice is the plural of mouse as we talk on computer screen, or they should be called mouses. But this is what happened to us. We had multiple screens at multiple levels on our table, multiple devices as we started communicating with the rest of the world. And of course, I have to talk to you about the famous downfall of the human spine. If you look at the extreme left of this chain of evolution, this is how, like most animals, the Homo sapiens or human species was destined to move. As we evolved, we became like this, then like this, and finally completely erect like this. But then, this is what happened. We developed weapons and bent down to hunt the enemies. We got modern machines and we bent down under the load of the machines. And finally, with COVID, we got the computers and we bent down double to look at the computers. And therefore, the spine that was in this shape, that had been modified over thousands and 10,000s of years to become straight, went back in what I call the reverse evolution of the human spine. And then, of course, we had the so-called, what I will call the Netflix revolution, as we found more time to lie at home or sit at home or be in strange postures at home and watch films and watch various programs on the computer. And whatever spine we had destroyed during work as we peered into the computer screens, we completely destroyed at home in the so-called Netflix revolution. And I call it this for fear of being sued for mentioning the name of any company. So the spine, the neck, which is what we're talking about today, that area of the spine indicated in red, which was meant to be straight because it had a very large, huge, heavy structure to support called the human head, now was subject to various degrees of abnormal angles. And if you really consider the neck or the cervical spine, as we call it, it's a very badly designed piece of anatomy. you have such a small little bit of spine supporting such a large head. And as you know, humans over the years have become very large and swollen-headed. And as their heads have increased, the spine has not. So it's become a narrow rod supporting a very, very large head. A very, very bad designer error in the first place. Unlike your pet dog, whose spine is not perpendicular to the floor, but parallel to the floor, whose cervical spine, also shown in red, same number of vertebrae, which are the bones of the spine, same number. But look at it. It is flexible, a much smaller head to support, and not even completely vertical, partially horizontal and partially vertical. A beautiful piece of anatomical design, unlike the human cervical spine. So this is what is the equivalent of the human cervical spine, a globe supported on a narrow rod. And anybody who plays with that globe knows how unstable that is while it's supported on that rod. And anybody who can play with that knows that if this rod is bent, then this globe is not going to be staying erect for much longer. So these are the 7 bones, the vertebra that make up our neck, the cervical spine. And they have strange names. The first 2 is called the atlas and the axis, and the name atlas itself is a bad anatomical name because the word atlas is based on the theory that Atlas in Greek mythology was asked to support the whole of the world on his head. And that's why, because this supports the whole of the globe, it is called the atlas. Of course, this is a completely mythical piece of Greek mythology, because in fact, Atlas was asked by Zeus to support the stars of the northern hemisphere on his head, never the entire world on his head. And a bad piece of sculpture, 14th century Florence, left the wrong impression in the minds of most Europeans, which then translated to that of the rest of the world. So to get a little more support to this narrow little rod which supports the head, humans evolved some other structures, and these are muscles. These are different other supports which support the head, anchor it to the trunk, and therefore a muscle like this is fashionably called in medical parlance the trapezius, but basically it's a broad muscle that helps support the head and gets that head to be supported by the shoulder and the rest of the back. Like all these little muscles that have different names that have been designed to be complicated names just to make it difficult for first-year students in medicine to pass their exams. But fundamentally, these are just supporting structures to support this very large human head. Now you can appreciate that if these muscles are not strong enough, then the pressure on the cervical spine, the mere bone, is much more. So if you're going to have your neck in the sort of posture we found that lady watching television a few slides ago, then you're going to have these muscles become atrophied, and you're going to get neck pain, and you're going to have your head not supported. Amazingly, you've already heard I spend my time photographing. Actually, I photograph wildlife. And all these animals that are photographed over the years, none of them ever suffer from neck pain. And you know why? Because their neck is horizontal to the ground, not vertical. And even the giraffe can hold its neck horizontal. Doesn't have to be vertical, as this African giraffe who was peering at my telephoto lens seems to suggest. And therefore, it isn't surprising that the first documented treatment of neck pain was to hang patients like this upside down on a well, allegedly because if you straightened out their spine, then their pain went away. Even 200 years later, same was the treatment. This is probably the first photograph of a patient being treated for severe neck pain. And as you can see, she was literally suspended in that state so that her spine could become straight. It may have been pleasurable for this attending physician. I'm not sure it was very pleasurable for the patient herself. So there is a right and a wrong way as we sit on those machines in the new normal, gazing at the computer screen. And you might think this is right, this is the wrong way, because what you want to do is have your neck bent a little back, a position which we call extension. So that just in case you're hearing a boring talk like mine on your computer and you fall asleep, your head falls back, which is much safer than it falling forward, because if it falls forward, all these muscles I showed you at the back of the head get stretched and damaged. So while if you fear you might fall asleep in the lecture, this is the position that you should take now before I finish, 25 to 30 degrees back from the right angle. And of course, the other thing is, this is a normal posture. But if your head moves forward, then the weight or the equivalent of the weight by the principle of levers of the first class will become much more. And as your head moves forward, your weight on the spine, which was 12 pounds, now becomes 42 pounds, although your brain or your head has not increased in size, your neck has just moved 3 inches forward. So for every inch of forward movement of our head, the weight of the head on the spine increases by an additional 10 pounds, believe it or not. And then one would have thought that was all the designer error on our neck, but it's not. We have 7 vertebrae, I showed you, which make the neck. These bones are separated by these little shock absorbers, which are called discs. And here, again, is a problem. People from this city will not need an introduction to these sweets. These are the so-called jol bhora sandesh, which means water-filled sweets. So while the outer crust of this sweet is solid, the inside is filled with liquid. And that doesn't make this a very strong piece of edible structure. Unfortunately, these discs are very much like the jol bhora sandesh. While their outside is firm, we call it the annulus fibrosus, the inside is soft and jelly-like, called the nucleus pulposus. And now, if you think that this little disc is sitting between 2 bones and carrying the weight of your head, you can well understand why it is no surprise that a bit of this jelly can push itself out and come back. Again, by a very supreme designer error, just behind this lies the spinal cord. Those electrical wires that carry all the senses from the brain down to your arms and legs. So if the spinal cord has this little bit of disc pushing back upon it, then it doesn't work. If it pushes out here, then this nerve doesn't work. If it pushes out here, then the spinal cord itself doesn't work. So if this, which is the nerve that goes out, is pressed, you get pain down your arm. If this is pressed, you get weakness of your legs. Just a time for a little commercial break. I'm often asked, who do you see if you have neck pain? Here are the options. You can see an orthopedic surgeon, a neurosurgeon, a neurologist, a physiotherapist, a physical medicine expert, a physiatrist, a rehab medicine expert. I am not biased, although I am now just about to celebrate my 20th year as a professor of neurosurgery. But I always show my patients when they ask this question, this photograph, and say, if your car were to be damaged in a car crash like this, would you go to the best body and painting service in town, read an orthopedic surgeon, or would you go to an integrated body and electric parts service center, read a neurosurgeon? I will not answer this question. Like my patients who are shown this photograph, I will leave you to decide. Okay, We need to talk some medicine because this is to be a scientific lecture, and you must be wondering what's the science in what he's talked about so far. Well, the science says this now, that this is our neck, and this is how it looks on an X-ray. We can see the bones, but does it help? Because we can't see the nerves. And we couldn't see the nerves well until 2003, when these two gentlemen, Peter Mansfield and Paul Lauterbur, gifted to the world a machine called the MRI. And that's what it looked like, the MRI scanner, which completely changed the world of neurosurgery. How does it see your neck? The patient is placed in a giant magnet. A radio wave is sent in, and I'm going to tell you why a radio wave is sent in a minute. The radio wave is turned off. The patient's body then emits a signal. This signal is received by the computer and produces a picture. That's all there is. You lie in a magnet, you're struck by a radio wave, the radio wave is switched off, you emit a signal, signal is picked up by the computer. On the screen appears the picture of your neck. How does it work? And I'll take a minute to show you how simple it is. You will remember, and all of you are big scientists and will know that this is the structure of the water molecule, and that the human body is mainly composed of water. So instead of looking at the human body as multiple molecules, we can just look at it as multiple water molecules. And of course, water molecules means the hydrogen atom. And if we consider a number of protons making up the human body, well, the moment you put these protons into a magnet, they all become aligned in the direction of the magnetic field. It's a bit like this. If you have some people walking on their hands and you have some people walking on your feet, and the protons in the body are in two directions, what we call parallel and anti-parallel, and you put the protons into a magnet, then they all become the same direction. So all the protons get aligned into the same direction, and you can now measure, exactly the amount of magnetic flux that you have. There is a problem. The magnetization takes place in the direction shown in the yellow arrow, which is in the long axis of the MR scanner. How then do you measure the magnetization? It's a bit like this. If you have a man going down a river, throwing water through a hose into the river, and you want to measure how much of the water he's pushing into the river, then you have to make sure he turns the hose 90 degrees towards the bank, so you can now record it. Amazingly, that's what the radio frequency pulse does. Apart from the magnet, which gets the proton aligned, the radio frequency pulse turns the vector 90 degrees so that it is no longer in the long axis of the magnet. It becomes a transverse magnetization, and this you measure in the MR scanner. That's why you have a radio frequency to get an MRI. And what difference it makes. Here's an X-ray of a young man who decided that he was going to race his motorcycle on one of the flyovers in town, landed up below the flyover, broke his neck, and you can actually see that these are two vertebrae and there's a fracture. But when you look at the MRI, look how beautiful it shows you. That's the bone. There's a bone that's moved forward, and there's the pressure on the spinal cord. And you see this white mark in the spinal cord? That's a sign of blood in the spinal cord. So unlike the X-ray, which just showed you bone, the MRI beautifully illustrates the entire spinal cord. Okay, so let's talk about some of the conditions that neurosurgeons treat in the neck. What are degenerative conditions? Well, degenerative conditions, I hate to say, are conditions that occur with age, because as we grow older, our spine from being straight becomes a little curved. And degenerative conditions of the spines are the equivalents of the wrinkles on our faces. And of course, one of the degeneration occurs is, you remember the disc? I told you that there was an outer firm layer called the annulus fibrosus. Well, this outer firm layer degenerates so that the liquidy, spongy stuff inside now protrudes out like so. And as it protrudes out, it goes and hits the nerve. And that's the nerve which becomes angry and red because it has a bit of disc material pressing down on it. This is what is called a disc herniation. And of course, it is not something that only affects elderly people. Here is an article published some years ago, Why Young India Should Worry About Spondylosis. And although the photograph is not quite matching with the scientific content of this article, there is no doubt that in this country, spondylosis is affecting our young population because they are not conscious about their spine. So what happens when you have a disc prolapse? Here's another MRI. Now all of you have become neurosurgeons. You can now look, that's the bone. Remember I told you behind is the spinal cord. Look, there's a disc which has moved back. If you can see this arrow, there's it compressing on the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is flattened and we say there's a disc prolapse and this young man came with weakness of both his legs. And this is another young lady. Again, you can see there is another disc prolapse here. But if you look carefully here, you see the disc is only on one side. So this disc prolapse presses on this nerve, unlike this disc prolapse, which presses on the entire spinal cord. So what you do as a neurosurgeon, what you do is you remove this disc. If you take this disc out, and it can be done with a microsurgical operation through the front of the neck, then eventually the two vertebrae, see there are discs here, but these two vertebrae fuse and become one because you've taken that disc out. And here's another young patient. You can see this patient with this little disc there, severe pain in one arm. 4 years later, this patient did refuse surgery. 4 years later, came back now with weakness of the legs. You can see how a small disc prolapse, which was pressing on the nerve, now becomes a huge disc, which is completely squashed the nerve and pressing the spinal cord. And therefore, this patient also needs surgery. But degenerative conditions are not the only conditions for which we have to operate on the neck or on the cervical spine as neurosurgeons. Not as long as we have highways in this country and not as long as we have fast cars and faster drivers to drive them. Because the commonest cause of neck problems on our roads are road traffic accidents. And perhaps you know that one Indian dies every 8 minutes due to a road traffic accident. In fact, neck injury is very, very common in this part of the world. Interestingly enough, the first neck injury described was probably in the first book of Kings from the Old Testament, where it is described how Eli came out to greet his sons who had come back victorious in a war. And he slipped at the edge of the staircase and he fell and hurt his neck on the edge of the stairs. It is described how Eli couldn't move his arms and legs, but could speak, and then gradually was unable to breathe. Because of course, if you have an injury to the upper part of your neck, the cervical spine, then the muscles of your arms and legs are paralyzed, as are also paralyzed the muscles that help you breathe. And in fact, in the Mahabharata, this is exactly the description of how Bhim is described as killing this massive demon. By description in the Mahabharata, he stood on his back, brought his neck forward and moved his neck backward and forward till his arms and legs did not move again. Again, possibly, and reference to a neck injury. But what is interesting is what we should all know about neck injuries is this. If you have a person who has a road accident, lies on the road like this, and probably has a neck injury, this is not how you lift him onto the ambulance, nor this, nor this, nor this. Because in each of these, you are making his neck go through all sorts of unnecessary postures. So if he has an injury in his neck, after you've lifted him, he will no longer move his arms and legs ever again, even if he gets to the best hospital in town. So this is how you move somebody whom you think has a neck injury. You fix his spine, somebody holds his neck, then you lift him onto that ambulance trolley. And in fact, in our own hospital, we have for the last 20 years been training the Calcutta police on how to deal with patients with injuries. And we regularly take classes on how these traffic sergeants should lift a roadside victim up onto an ambulance or a stretcher. It is very important to appreciate, therefore, that this is a very important first aid measure, which we must all know. When you have an injury in the neck, this is what can happen. You can have a bone of your neck moving forward like this. And of course, then what neurosurgeons do is a little bit of mechano, put and in front of the neck and back of the neck, screws and rods to hold it back into the position it should have been. And here's just some more examples of pictures. What else we operate on in the neck is deformities. And by deformities, I mean, you can recognize this lady. This is the lady called Manthara from the Ramayana, who had this hump back because she had a deformity of her spine. Listeners in Germany will probably be able to understand what I mean if I refer to the famous hunchback of Notre Dame, who also had a spine that was curved like this. And when we have some of our children that come to us with their spines like this, because of congenital problems with which they are born with, then you have to make this curved spine straight again. And this is also something that neurosurgeons do. And this is what we end up doing. So a spine which comes to us like this, you can make straight like this. The little important thing, of course, is that while you do so, you must not do anything to the spinal cord here, or they would never breathe again. Sometimes you have spines that come in all sorts of strange shapes. That's what the neck of a young boy's spine is. And we have to get his neck straight like this first, then fix him with all the mechanoset and reconstruct his neck. And this is also something that neurosurgeons can do. And of course, in this country, we often have to do this because of tuberculosis, which destroys the bones. And then you have to do major surgery on the neck to put it back together again. And you can fix them with various amounts of screws and rods from the front or back. And finally, you have little kids that are born with necks which are wrong. And you have to take a lot of time to make them straight again. And I'm not going to go into anatomical or medical facts, just to tell you, this is what you end up doing. You operate on them. This is, in fact, a 13-month child I'd operated on some years ago. And then you have to get their neck straight like you have in this. And of course, you want them to walk again. So this is their neck before the surgery. This is after. And you can see how it is made straight by these devices that we put into the neck. And of course, sometimes when the problem is high up in the neck, we go in, we take the bone out by this. This is, in fact, an operation which is done through the mouth. So working through the back of the mouth, we're able to take out bones of the spine and relieve the pressure on the spinal cord, then fix it, put it all back together with all these devices. So finally, it's 28 minutes and 30 seconds. So to wind up, the take-home message, our neck is a very badly designed piece of anatomy. We must remember that we have to look after it, and we must remember that our posture is very important. Not all of us can be like the great Buddha in this posture. Those mortals in this posture will no doubt end up seeing neurosurgeons very soon. And finally, look after your neck. You only get one. And I end with a photograph I took on the Mediterranean coast, and I just cannot help share this with you. This is not one boy. You'll be happy to know this is two boys, but I could not resist the temptation of photographing a neck deep in the mud. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Fabulous talk. Now I understand why, all the Kolkatans know you. Listening to you, it took me to my college days when I used to sit and listen to some of my best professors in the class. So it's magnificent. And on a lighter note, I must tell you the moment you said that the reclined position is better than being straight, I suddenly noticed many of the audience suddenly started swinging his head backwards. So that is a real
I
effect
hope
of
you didn't fall off to sleep just after that as well.
And one more thing that from our childhood, we were told, at least the family in which I grew up, that in front of the seniors, sitting in a reclined position was considered to be an impoliteness. So you are asked to be straight in front of the seniors. So do you think that this age-old tradition was not correct?
Well, I think all you have to do is bend your neck back 15 degrees. That's still pretty straight if you come to think of it. And the question is, of course, whether you want to look after your neck or look after a good age-old wisdom, which will bear you in greater stead in your life.
Well, I will stick my neck out and ask you another question. That you said that if one starts lamenting whole day that why there is no sun, that these teardrops will prevent him or her from seeing the stars. But in amidst the COVID pandemic, it seems that we are actually locked in a dark room where there is only darkness but no stars. That means that we are almost forced to live in a sedentary life, not only working with computers. Once I get up, then what should I do? Either I sit in a chair, well, I do a little bit of exercise like many people do, but we don't have much room to move for kilometers. So, these problems are bound to come. Can you just suggest us that in this sedentary life, what are the minimum thing we should do to keep our neck proper or to reduce our neck pain?
Well, you can do exercises even in the middle of COVID. And there is no reason. In fact, there is a common misconception that we shouldn't go out and walk out on the roads or in the parks. Yeah, we know from reality, it's definitely fact. You can go out and walk in the park. You're not going to get COVID because it's in the air. You need 15 minutes to get COVID. And if you're running in the park or jogging in the park or walking in the park, you're not going to be face to face with anybody. So you can certainly go out and walk. My father is 94 and he's been walking up and down the little lane in which I lived from day one of the lockdown. And he always said, what if it's illegal? Let the police come and catch me. What will a 94-year-old do in jail? And he's been walking every single day. And I don't see any reason why you can't go out and walk and exercise. COVID doesn't mean you have to shut yourself in your room. And actually, I'll just tell you one more thing. I have actually a small little YouTube talk on the stars of COVID. There are a lot of plus points of COVID that you have to also consider. And one of the greatest plus points, I think, is how we have improved the environment. We're no longer crisscrossing across the skies, tearing our ozone layers into 2 or into 3 or into 1,000 pieces, and then regretting why nature is coming down on us with typhoons and cyclones and other things. Because we have had the best quality of air in Calcutta in 2020 compared to the last 20 years. Although things are getting bad again as we get back to near normality. But that is true, and that's a silver lining. That's the star that you can actually see. The other thing in my life that I have learned, and it's been a lesson to me after being, on this planet for well over half a century, and that is how you can do a lot with a lot less. how much less we need to get on with life. And that is something that COVID has told us. We don't need to do lots of things that we took for granted in our lives before. I chair the education committee of an international neurosurgical society, and I was in a different country every month, sometimes in 2 or 3 countries every month, giving lectures and running courses. I can now do that from the comfort of my study. And we cater to many more people than I would have done had I gone to those different parts of the planet that I had to go to every month. So there are plus points, there are stars. You can't only shed tears because you can't see the sun. You have to accept that, but you have to keep your eyes open and you will find the stars. Sorry, this is not a philosophical talk. It's meant to be a scientific talk, so I apologize for that.
No. Science comes from philosophy, and this is the hope you have instilled among us. And is there anybody who can Dr. Chatterjee quite often? So if anybody wants to ask any question, just unmute your mic and ask the question.
So, Pulakta, can I ask a quick question? Okay, so I have a small question. So so inside the spine, this material which sort of comes out, is there a synthetic equivalent if sort of this goes bad? Can you refill this with silicones, or maybe is there anything which has been discovered which can be sort of filled back? You know, if this...
No, I'm afraid not, because it's like a cushion.
Okay.
It's like a cotton inside a cushion with a cushion cover.
Okay.
And if you have somebody who's rather large and overweight sitting on a cushion, and you have a small tear on the cushion cover, the cotton will come out through that tear.
Right.
And you can't put it back. If you put it back, it'll come out through that tear again. So what we can do is take out the whole disc and put in an artificial disc. That is possible, which simulates the movement of a disc, but it's not exactly filling up with jelly. There are some things that the creator can create, which we can't yet.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Shushmita, do you like to ask anything?
No, I just, if you have all finished, then I just like to say a
Okay.
few words.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me thank Dr. Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, deeply appreciate you came and shared time with us. Gave a wonderful time. I know how busy you are. Thank you so much. We hope to meet you again in this type of lectures. And you are one of the few doctors who actually said positive about COVID. I mean, every other day I look at the television, the doctors always come up with gruesome situation that the doomsday are almost coming. So, I mean, this is a big message you have articulated, that life is like this and we have to take it in proper stride. We should wipe up our tears so that we can see the beautiful stars in the sky. Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chatterjee. Yeah, it's for a wonderful talk. Yeah. And I also would like to thank other speakers, Dr. Peter Schleicher, Dr. Debabrata, who has already left, and Dr. Claudia Hülso. And now I'd like to express our gratitude to the 3 former Humboldt Fellows, without whose support this web-based science lectures series wouldn't have been possible. They are Dr. Shyam Sengupta of IISER Kolkata, Professor Ranjan Ganguly, and today's moderator, Professor Pulak Sengupta, both from Jadavpur University. Since August 2020, we organized 7 web-based science lectures, including this one, and these all are available on our YouTube channel of the German Consulate channel. Thank you very much for Riddhiman Ganguly for putting all these sessions on YouTube. Just to mention, our tech support Riddhiman Ganguly is a class 10 student of St. Claret School, Barakpur. Now we conclude this session and our series of web-based science lectures 2020 with the following presentation that is already you are seeing. Thank you and good evening, and have a peaceful life in 2021. Thank you.